Well, here we go again. This is part 2 of Friends for Life. Chapter 7. Wendy's memory comes flooding back. 5 months had gone by since that Christmas day. People walking along the street noticed there was now 2 6-year-old girls collecting plastic bottles. And whenever anybody asked who the other girl was, they would say, "She's my sister." Now this day started like all the others, with these 2 sisters had spent together, but it was going to end in tears. What happened was this. It was about midday and they were all out on the streets picking up plastic bottles and anything else they could sell. Mary shouted out to Wendy to watch out for the cars in the roadway when suddenly this big red bus sounded its horn next to Wendy. She jumped back and in doing so knocked her head on the wall at the side of the road. Her eyes started to glaze over and she sunk to her knees. Mary came running over to her and held her tight in her arms. Wendy started to groan and fainted. Mary picked her up and carried her back to their home and laid her on the bed. Some 2 hours later she opened her eyes and said to Mary, "I remember! I remember!" She sat up in bed and taking Mary's hands in hers, looked at her eyes and said, "I love you as my sister, and what I'm now going to tell you is all about myself and my family." Getting up, she walked over to where the doll Susan was, and holding it tightly to her, she came back and placed it to Mary's lap and smiled. "You love Susan, don't you? And I love you as much as you love me, and I will never be able to say thank you enough for giving me my life." Mary looked away, sort of embarrassed by what Wendy was saying. "This is no life, we just survive. Nobody cares if we live or die. Each day we struggle just to live through the night, to wake up in the following morning," Mary replied. "I love you," said Wendy, "and I care very much if you live or die. You have given me back my life, and I will tell you how." Wendy then went on to explain all about her parents, her father always too busy even to talk to her, her mother always going to see friends and have parties, how Wendy had everything she wanted except love. She told Mary she had never known love until she met her. She told all about her clothes and toys, or about always having enough food to eat, money in her pocket. Mary put up her hands and said, Stop, I have to tell you that I stole the money you had in your pocket to buy food for us, and I'm sorry that I have not told you before." Wendy, with tears running down her dirty face, "Mary, darling, you worked so hard to feed me. You nursed me back to health. You cared for me even when I did not know who I was. You trusted me, and most of all, you loved me. I promise," she went on to say, "for the rest of my life, I will make sure everything I have, be in my power, I will share with you. You did not steal from me. You used what little money I had and cared for me." Both girls hugged each other and cried. Once they had stopped crying, they began to smile and laughed at each other's faces. It looked like someone had drawn white lines down their faces where the tears had washed away some of the dirt. Wendy, when they had settled down again, told Mary all about her life, how she was a rude and nasty girl, that she had never had any friends, and smiling at Mary said, "Except you." Everything about her past life she told Mary. Mary was thinking that Wendy had got everything that she had always wanted, dresses, toys, food, but the one thing that Wendy had never had, and that was the warm love of her mother. They hugged and cried for what was left of the day, and not collecting any bottles, and no money to buy food, so they climbed into bed with Susan between them, and were soon fast asleep. They woke next day and planned what to do. Chapter 8. The Homecoming. They sat for some time trying to work out what would be the best way for Wendy to arrive back home. It had been almost 6 months since that Christmas day when she jumped from the car. They decided they would go over to where Wendy lived and see how things had changed. Whatever was going to happen, it was going to happen to them both. They would be from now on excuse me, sisters. The thought had crossed both their minds that maybe Wendy's parents might have moved, and she might never be able to find them. But who cares? They would still have each other, and that would be the main thing. They also knew that they could not carry on living under this roadway, so packing up what little bits they both had, they said goodbye to their tented home and walked away. Mary thought of all the happy times she had spent in that tent with her mother, all those wonderful stories, all the fun that she and Wendy had had over these last 6 months. That was all behind her now, and they were going to start a new life. What was it going to be? Well, they did not know or even care. What they cared about was each other. They jumped onto a passing tram, but having no money for the fare, the ticket collector quickly threw them off. They went running down the road, singing to themselves. People looked at them and thought they were quite mad. They walked all that day, along dirty streets, past people sleeping on the side of the road, past little children begging for food, past little tented homes where people lived down in the gutter. Night time came and they had nowhere to sleep, so they just huddled in a doorway and waited till morning. They had not eaten now for 2 days and were feeling very hungry. They walked through the fruit market. Oh, that wonderful food! But they had no money to buy any. They just sat on the curb and held out their hands, and after about 2 hours had been given enough money to buy some apples, which they did, and they ate them as quick as they could. Feeling refreshed, they continued their walk to where Wendy used to live. It never seemed so far when you're in a car, but walking took them another night and a day to arrive at the house, and they got there about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Excuse me. Wendy was uncertain as to what to do. Should she just go up to the door, knock on it, and when Mother answered it, say, "Hello"? Should she wait until Father came home and go up to him in the car and say sorry? Would they pick her up in their arms and hold her tight and tell her how worried they'd been and how wonderful it was that she had found her way back? Would they let her sister Mary stay as well? All these thoughts were going through their mind, and they decided that the best thing to do was just to sit on the curb and wait. Something would sort out this problem for them both. She was home. But was that what she wanted? Chapter 9. Seeing her mother. They'd been sitting on the curb for maybe about 30 minutes. They did look a sight, dirty and smelly, carrying a few bits and pieces in plastic bags. Wendy said to Mary that she cannot remember if she had even seen street beggars near her house before, but she also remarked that she did not notice anything, unless it was for herself. So they just sat, 2 sad-looking girls on the curb. A rather large and gleaming bright red car came along the road, stopped outside of Wendy's house, and her mother and one of Mother's friends got out. Wendy started to stand up and was going to run over to her mother, but stopped in her tracks as soon as she heard what her mother was saying to her friend. "Look at those 2 dirty girls over there. It should not be allowed. This is a nice area. We should have a law to stop these sort of things happening." Her friend agreed with her and shouted across the street, "Go away, you horrible children!" And with that she threw some money into the air for them, and then both of them walked into their house. Wendy could not believe her ears. Her mother didn't even recognise her. All she did was told her to go away. She turned to Mary and, resting her head on her shoulder, just burst out into tears. Mary held her tight and tried to explain that she did look a bit different from what she was 6 months ago, and that was why her mother did not know her. Sometimes, no matter how much you hurt, you have to think of the practical things in life, and Wendy got up to collect the money that had been thrown at them. There was enough to buy them some food tonight. It was just as she was picking up the last rupee that her mother's friend walked back down from the house and got into her car. As she drove away, she shouted out the window that they should both go away and never come back, and finished with the words, "You nasty little children." Wendy started to cry again, but smiled when she heard her sister, as they always called each other now, and say, "Hey, guess what? Let's have some hot rice tonight." It was now getting dark, and so they walked away and found a street kitchen cooking hot rice. So after buying enough for both of them, and still having some money left over, they found another doorway to spend the night. This night, though, they would have full tummies, and they slept until the morning. Chapter 10. Seeing her father. They spent the next morning walking down the streets close by Wendy's home. She in the past had walked these streets many times, but was now looking at them from a different level. When she used to walk them before, she always looked into the shop windows, never caring or wanting to care for the people living in the gutters. Now she was one of these people living in the gutter. She reached out a hand, and holding tightly to Mary's hand, cried. They walked the streets until late afternoon. They had no idea of time, as neither of them had watches. They walked once again along the street where Wendy used to live and sat down at the side of the road, a little bit further down from her house. This time they would wait until her father came home, and she would run to him, and everything would be all right. Or so she hoped. It got dark, and Wendy started to worry in case her father was working out of town and would not be back that night. Suddenly, coming down the road with all its lights on, came her father's car. Oh! She hoped in her heart, just knew in her heart, that now everything was going to be all right, and she stepped out into the middle of the road and started to wave her hands to her father so her father could see her. The car got closer, but did not seem to be slowing down. She could now hear the horn of the car blasting out in the stillness of the evening. She moved out only just in time to the right as the car sped past her. She heard her father shouting out as she went by, "Get out the road, you little brat!" Little brat, she thought. I'm your daughter. Mary came running over to her and checked that she was all right, and said maybe they'd better go and come back tomorrow. Wendy was too upset to argue, so hand in hand they walked back down the road to find somewhere to sleep. Chapter 11. The police are called. The next day was just like the last one. They wandered around the streets until late afternoon and walked back to Wendy's house. This time they hid in some bushes while they waited for both mother and father to be in the house. It was very late when her father arrived, and after giving him maybe 5 minutes inside the house, Wendy and Mary went up to the door and rang the bell. She could hear her mother saying, "Who can that be at this time of night? You go and answer the door while I finish watching this TV show." Suddenly the door opened, and there stood her father. Her father shouted at them both and told them to go away, telling them that he doesn't give to street beggars. Wendy looked at her father and said in a soft voice, "Father, it's me, your daughter, and my new sister Mary." "Our daughter Wendy went missing over 6 months ago and has never been seen since, and you look nothing like her, you lying little brat. And besides all, she did not have a sister. Go away before I call the police." And with that, he slammed the front door. Wendy shouted out she was not lying, brat, and was their daughter, but it was no use. She could hear her father talking on the phone to the police. They both ran away from the house, not knowing what to do next. They could hear a police car siren getting louder in the distance and started running as fast as they could. It was, of course, no good, as the way they were running was directly towards the police car, and it was not long before the headlights caught them in their glow. By now, both girls were out of breath, and running any further was out of the question. So, clutching their little bag of belongings, they stood still and waited for the police to catch them. Chapter 12. Sorry, got a bit of a dry throat here. No. Anyway, here we go. Chapter 12. Susan comes to the rescue. The policeman told both Wendy and Mary to get into the back of the car and told them they were both in a lot of trouble. They drove along the road and stopped outside Wendy's house. He told them both to get out and don't try to run away. The policeman walked up the pathway and rang the bell. The door opened, and there, as before, stood her father. Wendy went to speak, but the policeman told her to be silent for the moment. Her father then told the policeman that these two lying brats had been hanging around the house these last few days. They had been begging on the street, had knocked on his door, and for all he knows, would probably try and break in when they weren't at home and steal some of his valuables. The policeman agreed with Wendy's father, and in fact it did look that way. Wendy's mother now came to the door and told the two work girls to get away from them, and both smelt, and she did not want her house smelling like some dirty street beggars. Wendy started to cry, and Mary could only stand by her and hold her hand tightly. The policeman looked up and said, "We've met before when your daughter went missing last Christmas. Did she ever come back?" Her father looked at the policeman. No, She was never found. We've given up all hope of ever seeing her again. We loved her so much and miss her terribly. Mother, Father, I am your daughter Wendy. I've come home. The policeman said to her, Come on, young lady, let's be getting you down to the police station, as lying will not help you. But I am their daughter, and this is my new sister Mary. Her mother laughed. There you have it, officer. Lies from her own mouth. Wendy never did have a sister. She was an only child. The policeman told them that he would take the two girls away and they would not bother them again, and walked back down the pathway to the car. Mary was still holding on to Wendy's hand and pulled back up the path and pushed past Wendy's father and mother into the hallway. The policeman came running up behind them and grabbed Buff and scruff at their necks and started to pull them out of the house. Mary reached inside a little plastic bag of belongings and, taking the thing she loved the most besides Wendy, her sister, she held up in the air a very dirty, smelly doll, dressed in a greasy, pale pink dress. Chapter 13. Was this really Wendy's parents? Wendy asked the policeman if she could explain about the doll. The policeman, with nothing to lose, let her carry on speaking. Look, Father, as she carefully took the doll from Mary's outstretched hand. This is the doll you threw out the window last Christmas. We were taking it back to the shop to change it. You must remember that. Her father turned to his wife and told her, This little horrible girl had most likely heard our Wendy, got to hear about me throwing out the doll, and has come here to try and cheat us out with her lies. Her mother was now sitting down on the stairs with her face in her hands, crying and sobbing. She looked up. Oh, darling, I so want this to be true. Our lives have been so sad since Wendy disappeared. And she broke into more sobbing. Her husband, Wendy's father, explained to the policeman just how much they had missed Wendy, just how much their lives had changed since she disappeared. She told the policeman that first they were both pleased she had gone, as she was a very nasty and rude girl. When she was no longer here, the house seemed so peaceful, and they got used to living on their own. They only lasted a few weeks, and we came to realise just how much we had taken Wendy for granted. And we knew we would do everything we could do to try and find her. We loved her, and we had never ever told her so. We were always so busy with our own lives. Wendy could not believe her ears or what she was listening to. She held on tightly to both Mary and Susan, and her legs started to give way, and she sank to the floor. Mary sat down with her and listened to what was being said. Wendy's father explained they had put adverts in the paper to try and find her. They had employed people to search for her, but nobody could find her. They put photos in shops and everywhere they could think of, but nobody had seen their beautiful daughter Wendy. Mind you, that would have been no surprise, as looking at those dirty, smelly girls sitting on the floor, holding their plastic bags of belongings, you would never in 1,000 years thought that one of them was Wendy. Every night I drive slowly back from work, hoping that I will see her. Just once. And he started to cry, so that I can love her and say how sorry I am for hurting her. My wife goes to people's houses and tells them all about Wendy and asks them to look out for her. Our lives have changed. We've become lost people, and we are hard and unkind to people we don't know because we have lost our daughter. Tears were now running down his face, and he sat down next to his wife and held her tight and kissed her gently on the cheek. Wendy had never seen her father show any love to her mother, and it was strange to see them now, after these last 6 months, hugging each other. Her father turns back to the policeman and said, We've become rude people, and I would like to say how sorry I was to these poor children. He got up and, walking up to the two girls, still sitting on the hall floor, held out his hand and said how sorry he was that he had nearly run them over and that his wife had been unkind to them. The policeman looked on as the girls stood up, and as they did, their father reached out, started to take the doll from Wendy's hand. She held on to it tightly, and looking in her father's eyes, said, Father, this is Susan, my new sister Mary, and I really am your daughter. I was lost, but now I'm back home. Wendy's mother stood up from where she was still been sitting on the stairs, came up to the girls and said, "Oh, with all my heart, I wish you were my daughter, but you look nothing like her. Please don't hurt us any more with your lies. We will give you some money and will not ask the policeman to take you away, but just stop lying to us, please. Please stop lying." Wendy looked at her mother and father and with tears pouring down her dirty face said, "I can understand your doubt, and you think that I am lying to you. I could have stolen the doll and heard all about Wendy. There was one thing only you and my father know about me. Not even my sister Mary knows." There she goes again, her mother shouted. "She's lying, as Wendy never had a sister." Wendy lifted up her arm and pulled back a sleeve of her dirty blouse and pointed to a long scar that ran from underneath her armpit to the back of her shoulder. "Remember this and how I got it? I fell off my bike and the handlebars struck into me. You found me in the back garden with blood everywhere. You took me to the hospital and they stitched me up with 15 stitches. You must remember that, Mummy. I put the x-ray they took in my bedside drawer and it should still be there." She never ever called her mother Mummy before, but it just seemed the right thing to do now. Her mother, Mummy, looked at the scar, looked at her daughter and her husband and said, "Our darling daughter has come home." Taken into her arms, she hugged and kissed her. The policeman started to walk out the house, remarking he was not wanted there anymore, and taking Mary's hand, started to walk back to the police car.